Hi, welcome to Sustain Talks. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. I just want to start off by saying, if you love listening to these interviews, please do follow us and subscribe on the button just below. Today, I'm joined by Michelle Furtado. Michelle is a sustainability consultant and activist. I've been looking forward to this conversation so much, especially as here in the UK, activism is at the forefront of the news with the Just Stop Oil campaigners protesting on a daily basis, and we'll get into that further. But first of all, welcome, Michelle. It's so good to have you here. How are you?
Thank you. Yeah, really good. Thanks for having me, Sam.
Yeah, great. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit more about you, your background, and what you've been doing?
Yeah, so I'm a sustainability consultant and I come from an environmental background. So I sort of trained in garden design and then interdisciplinary design for the built environment, designed lots of parks and playgrounds and moved into green space policy. And then that was the start of when I became an activist, because I worked with loads of volunteer groups up and down the land, friends of groups, who probably don't even think of themselves as activists, but I really do see them as active citizens, and I think that's how I kind of view activism. So yeah, that's where I started, and then I now am involved in, I'm a trustee of a couple of charities in the UK, and I'm involved in Worthing Climate Action Network, which has done lots of placard protests outside town halls, but is also kind of instrumental in actually setting up a whole load of community organisations and delivering actual work on the ground in our local area. So yeah.
Brilliant. Let's go back then, because I know in your activism, and I know that obviously a lot of people at the moment are talking about whether it's right or wrong the way that it's been doing, but you've been the work that you've done before writing to politicians. Can you just tell us a bit more about how in depth that work has gone? Because I think that's often misunderstood, that work has been gone that's not out there protesting behind the scenes.
Yeah, so I've been part of Worthing Climate Action Network for about 10 years now, and I got involved with them. They were protesting outside the town hall around trying to get West Sussex County Council to divest their pension fund from fossil fuels. And so I was there with my placards and my baby strapped to me and one crying child in the buggy, and just got involved with the group, and then kind of stuck with the group, took my children along to all the meetings, and we wrote letters. We have spoken to the pension panel at West Sussex County Council. We have, when I say wrote letters, I think we probably write at least 6 times a year to the pension panels, to our MPs, to a whole range of people, the unions, trying to get them involved. We've ran petitions, and we've got further down the line, but they've still got, they have divested some, but not because of us necessarily, but because they're just kind of, they're saying that their investment people are looking more at ESG, so environmental, social and governance kind of issues, but they've still got a little bit left to actually divest. So we're still campaigning 10 years down the line. So it is a lot of work that has gone into the activism side of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and people are saying that we should be doing more of that and less of the stuff that's going on at the moment. But it seems like the stuff that's going on at the moment is in the newspapers every day, and when you write letters, it just doesn't get the attention that's needed. Do you think that that's the problem?
I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said for armchair activism. So that's, you know, we all get the petitions asking us to sign different things, and there's so many good causes out there that we should be signing. And now I know from our local MPs, and this is around the kind of Worthing Ada area, so Shoreham and Worthing on the south coast, they do not respond to these mass campaigns. So they've taken it upon themselves to actually ignore the fact that 2,000 constituents in their local area will actually sign a petition. Whereas I've had conversations with these MPs saying, but actually that still shows a depth of feeling that you should be taking into account in your decision making on behalf of your constituents. So but it doesn't seem to sink in. So that kind of armchair activism works to a point. Writing to MPs, we've all done that. I continue to do that as well. But again, we quite often get stock answers that are towing the kind of party line. And I think particularly at this moment, when in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss, we know we're at crisis levels, we're not actually seeing the leadership from politicians to take us to a safe pathway for our future and for, you know, the future of children globally. So there's got to be this push from the peripherals around this kind of extreme action that makes space for all this other discourse to kind of come to the top of the pile in terms of attention, because obviously there's a lot of different things vying for attention at the top of politics. And, you know, with the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis, as we're seeing, it's actually, at the moment, it feels like there's more of a case to be made for positive climate action, but it still is falling off the agenda somewhat. And particularly with this government at the moment in the UK, we've now got this push back against environmental action through the changing of laws and increasing police powers. And actually that's quite scary, because that has peripheral effects on whether, you know, your local school is closing and you want to go and protest about the fact that your local school is closing, or your GP office or something along those lines. That's actually infringing upon all of our rights to protest about whatever it is that we feel, you know, is important in our lives. So yeah, so there's a lot of kind of different strands and threads that are running through things at the moment. But I have to say, I am on the side of the activists who are out there, just stop oil. Yes, it's disruptive, but we need to have, we've talked, we've done the writing and the being polite, and we still continue to do that, but actually there needs to be more kind of positive, firm action taken.
Yeah. I know you saw it. I did a poll the other day that asks generally if people support the Just Stop Oil activists, and 43%, the highest result, said yes, but not in this way. 20% said yes, I fully support, and 37% said no. But for the ones that are saying yes, but not in this way, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think there's, because there were some of the comments were talking about how they should be going and standing outside fuel depots and, you know, like headquarters, for example, of the fossil fuel companies. But they have done that. So they've been doing that, but it doesn't get the same media attention that, for example, you know, throwing the soup over the Van Gogh sunflowers did get, because it's dramatic and drastic, and actually it is a shocking thing to actually see. But then actually there were some quite good articles around. Van Gogh would probably have quite liked it, because he was a bit of a punk himself. So he would probably have quite enjoyed that action being taken. And also we have to think that, you know, we have these incredible cultural things in our museums that we want to protect. But with the impact of climate change going forward, we could potentially lose these and lose humanity's culture within, you know, the weather changes and patterns that are actually going to happen in the future. So there is, I do get how shocking and disturbing it is for some people, but I also do believe that it's needed to actually have that media impact. And I think that's more what they're going for, is getting the headlines in the paper. I mean, it's that whole you know, no publicity is bad publicity. So
I agree. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I did read that they had researched whether the painting was protected, and, you know, if it wasn't, they wouldn't have done that. Is that that's the case, that the activism that they're doing, you know, they don't just go out and protest. They look into what they're doing. Yeah,
because they probably really care about that picture as well, you know, and seeing it in real life. It's an incredible painting. So I would very much doubt that they would actually want to destroy things. What they're more worried about is having their futures destroyed. And I think when you're young, it's particularly in that kind of age group, they've got real fire in their bellies to be able to go out and do that kind of action, and also not the ties that maybe some people have. So what you'll find in some of the Extinction Rebellion actions is that it's a lot of older retired people who don't have the same responsibilities anymore, who can go out there and be arrested for blocking bridges, but yeah, or that young demographic. So it's quite an interesting mix. But there's a lot of opinions that don't necessarily have done the research about why the protesters are doing that. They just kind of react to the news, and I think that's partly how we actually absorb the news nowadays, is in a very reactive way. It's really easy just to write a couple of sentences and dismiss people as being jobless or reckless or whatever they want to kind of say. And a lot of the comments are kind of worse. But so for example, we in our local Extinction Rebellion group, which was kind of set up through Worthing Climate Action, so there's a whole group of people there who are actually now have fundraised and organised themselves to actually set up a climate emergency centre. And these are springing up across the country, and they're all completely community led and community driven. So that's people fundraising, organising leased premises, getting groups together and making plans for workshops and programs and things coming out of it to spread the word locally and help people, for example, access grants to insulate their houses. So really good, formative, positive action. But they still get a lot of grief on social media in terms of comments and things putting them down. So it's a bit of a loveless task doing this kind of sustainability work sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's such a shame that you don't hear about that, and the public perception of the work that's going on to Just Stop Oil and to XR, there's not enough opportunity for these conversations.
Yeah.
I feel that the people that are interviewed on the news, they're always really attacked by the newsreader or by the interviewer, and they're not giving them the opportunity to actually say there's good work going on.
Yeah.
But the majority of people that see what's happening are being turned against the activism. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the kind of pushback against activism stems from like fear, and that we hold, I think a lot of us who have any idea about the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, a lot of fear about the future. And even if that's not manifesting in you being bothered necessarily about the climate crisis, you can feel fearful about how the world is. So the energy crisis, the war, all of these things make us feel really uncertain, and then it's easy to kind of push back against easy targets. And so people who are putting themselves in the front line do become those easy targets to have a go at, as opposed to it's more difficult to make the arguments to the politicians, to the businesses who actually leading the charge. There's a lot of greenwashing, and we come from a culture where we've had 40 years of science that's telling us that the climate is warming and that this is changing global systems, but also 40 years of misinformation and lies being put out by the fossil fuel companies. And so we're being directed in particular ways to think and to imagine that we can continue consuming and maintaining the same lifestyles as we've kind of become accustomed for, when actually we do need to change them to some degree to actually live on an ongoing basis for the future. And some of that is around, there's a lot of good work, for example, on the edges of climate work, which is around maybe meat production. So instead of it being intensively farmed meat production, we might be able to have lab grown meat, which is actually cleaner and more healthy for us, because it doesn't have any of the kind of antibiotics, you know, put into the industrial farming systems. And then that has the potential, if we could, you know, introduce that technology on a wide scale to feed our populations, to actually free up huge amounts of land for reforesting and rewilding. So there's this kind of, if we don't know about what the potential is going forward, then I think it's difficult for the public to see pathways, and therefore it's easy to pick on people who are putting themselves in the front line, just because that's a kind of natural human reaction.
Yeah,
I think, you know, for us in the West, we're more lucky that we have just small groups of students and retired people that we can kind of see there. But actually, when you're looking at the global South, people are dying to save their environments, and being murdered by illegal logging, you know, and trying to protect their resources. And that's a whole different level of activism that our kind of Western activism supports to a degree, but actually we don't have anything near the hardship that other people are facing in different countries. So, you know, I know from my activist friends that we have to kind of console ourselves with the negative comments, but we then make sure that we're looking after each other enough to say, actually, no, this is going to be a good project, and we're going to do good for our communities here. So
yeah.
we just keep pushing forward. Yeah.
So do you think that the work that the activists are doing at the moment, do you think it's working?
I think it's keeping the issue alive when it could get lost in a whole load of other issues. And, you know, if we can raise the level, like you say, raising the level of conversation is actually quite an important task to do. And I think some of the people who speak for Just Stop Oil make their cases very eloquently heard in these quite difficult interviews on, you know, national platforms. And so whether it's working or not, it's difficult to tell, because I think at the moment we can see in the UK that politicians and billionaires are quite in cahoots with each other, and actually there's a lot of vested interests to keep our policies you know, in the favour of fossil fuel production, as though it's you know, as though it's a kind of pathway towards a zero carbon future, when actually we know we need more transformative action. So, you know, there was a thing that I was watching by an economist, and I can't remember the name of him now, but he was saying that we only need around sort of 3 to 4% of global GDP to actually put into renewable technologies to hit that kind of 1.5 degree target that we're all trying to achieve. I mean, that's a tiny amount of money in terms of the global economy to actually be putting into that technology and moving us forward. It's a tiny amount, and it's a realistic amount as well. So
I honestly don't understand at all. You know, there definitely are the funds there from some of the world's billionaires that are spending their money on buying Twitter rather than saving the world. I just I don't understand it myself, but I believe that we need to do as much as we can, and being able to do these sustained talks and share people's experience and stories and give you the opportunity to share your views, I think is hugely important. Just to add, I think, you know, in the news, even over the last couple of days, we've seen that we really are at crisis point, and if we don't reduce our emissions by 50% in the next 7 years, that we're going to be in a bad way. Can you just go into that a little bit more and just say from your experience what that looks like?
What, in terms of like actually getting those carbon emissions down?
No, if we don't, what's the consequences?
Yeah, okay. So I mean, the weather patterns are already changing, and so there's some really good research that was done through the Stockholm Institute, and it was looking at kind of planetary boundaries, and it's got some nice graphics. Then we are overshooting multiple planetary boundaries. The problems happen when, So the actual science hasn't changed from 40 years ago. The planet is warming because of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but the models have got better. So now we can account for things like methane release from permafrost melting, for example. But then within those feedback loops, we don't actually know how much methane is going to be released and what that will then have, because it's like 80 odd times more impactful in terms of emissions into our atmosphere. So these kind of feedback loops are actually, you know, beginning to happen. I was reading that the Mediterranean, for example, has absorbed so much carbon dioxide. So it's about 25% of our carbon dioxide is absorbed into the oceans. And the Mediterranean has now absorbed so much that it's actually it's flipped over. So it's actually generating carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So we've got these tipping points that are happening, and if they go, I mean, if we just continue as business as normal, the picture is bad. I mean, I was doing when I was doing my master's degree at Cambridge, like about 15 odd years ago, we had a teacher there who was talking about the climate crisis and science, and he was saying the stuff that we know now in terms of science isn't related into the policy or even the public arena for a good sort of 8 to 10 years. There's a bit of a lag between academia and kind of policy. And when you look at the IPCC reports, they are diplomatically written, I suppose, is because they have to kind of be written in such a way that every country that signs up to them is accepting of the science within that. But actually, some of the frontline science is more worrying in terms of what the impacts are that we've had on the planet. So that, you know, if we just continue as business as usual, then some of the real doom predictions, you know, fires, floods, sea level rises, massive migrations of populations, losses of global cities, irreplaceable, you know, farming loss around the kind of center of the globe, the loss of the tropics, all of these kind of impacts are going to play out. However, if we do actually take action, and we have got the means to do that, and, you know, the technology is in place to start moving quite quickly down these pathways, then we don't have to have that future. We don't have to have a Mad Max future. We can have a future where we can still potentially achieve, you know, star travel and all the rest of it, but we will be building technologies and using technologies that benefit our society and our environment first, beyond this kind of pure profit-driven economy. There won't be an economy on a dead planet, and I think that's an important thing to remember. And actually, you know, having an economic growth is just a non-sustainable thing on a finite resource planet. So until we can actually go to the stars and mine, you know, comets and meteorites and all the rest of the stuff, then we're not going to be able to bring in outside resources from the ones we have on this planet.
And I wanted to ask you that question first before I ask you the question that you were what do we, so, you know, putting that into people's mind, are we doing enough? I assume from our conversation the answer is no, but what more do we need to do? How much more do we need to do? Who's it down to? Government, business? What your views?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, so there's a lot more that we should be doing, but I find it interesting that actually business leaders are taking more of a kind of pathway than the government is at the moment. So that's how I see it. So you've got people, you know, the kind of networks of businesses are actually saying, no, we really do want these green policies in place, because they give us then a strong foundation upon which to grow our futures and to build around. Whereas you're seeing a kind of kickback from policymakers at the moment on actually following down zero carbon pathways. Policymakers, though, do have the control, and so it depends on who's in with the policymakers and what the vested interests are, because we know, you know, they like the Tufton Street think tanks, for example. So there's a whole load of them there that are charitable status. They're funded, we don't know who through, by their funding. They get lots of money to make the science of climate change and biodiversity loss look look as though it's not finished and not actually definite. And these are still playing out, and we shouldn't be even having these conversations anymore. They should just be like non-conversations. The science is settled. This is what we actually need to do. So when you can look at something like the Green New Deal, for example, and how that would mean insulating all our Victorian housing stock across the UK, and looking at heat networks across different communities, and how different communities can have decentralized power through solar or wind or whatever that looks like in their area. These are, this is job creating stuff. It's also looking at the health of those communities within their own houses. And so having these kind of national programs is going to do a lot more good in terms of boosting economic kind of growth than it would, for example, HS2, which I can see there's definitely an argument for some of the benefits of HS2, but they did scrap a cycle lane that was going to run the length of HS2 as well. And that cycle lane was actually going to bring in, I think it was like every £1 invested was going to bring in £10 of benefits, which was like vastly more than the HS2 kind of review on their finances was going to offer. So, there's a lot of kind of cost value benefits. We want to kind of stick within this rigid economic framework that we can use to work out that taking action on climate change is going to generate jobs. It's going to make communities far more healthier in the long run, and also then we can think about having these wider conversations about how other things might like to look within our communities from that, how green they would want to be, where we might like to bolster our local food networks so that our food is not reliant on a global system where wheat can suddenly become a weapon within a war that is not of our making. So, there's a lot to be said about having these deeper conversations.
Yeah, there really is. And, I think I'm so pleased that we got to have this conversation. We've spoken many times before, but to give you this opportunity to share your experience, I'm absolutely delighted. And I could just listen to you for hours and hours and hours. I know the viewers like about 30 minutes. So I thank you so much for your time, for your experience, and sharing the information that you have. I think it's so important, and I hope it makes people think differently about what is going on and with activism and what is going on in the world. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
No problem. I think I'd just like to finish on it. If people were out there, go and find a book called Citizens, and it's about becoming an active citizen and actually trying to find where you can make decisions in your local area. And once people start taking those actions, I think then they really get a sense of pride for what they're actually achieving as well. So that's important. We've got power, people power.
Yeah, we do have people power, and doing this is the power that I'm giving to share stories. And
Thank you.
thank you. Have a really, really good day. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.